Hello my friends and fellow travelers, my name is Pierce, this is my channel Tales from the Road. Thanks for stopping by. Today we're talking about Singapore, and it's a country that I just went to and I actually got to work with their tourism board, which was very cool. But during that time I learned a whole bunch about this very specific city-state in Southeast Asia. It's a place with a lot of history, a lot of cultural diversity, super delicious food, and like a lot to do. And there's so much more than just on the top tourist list thing. So in this video, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know before you go to make sure that you have an awesome and memorable time in a very unique and very cool city. If that sounds good, let's get Singaporean. As we always do with these videos, let's start with a little historical and geographic background so we can get to know Singapore a little bit better before we go. So first up, where is Singapore on the map? Singapore is found in Southeast Asia at the very tip of the Malay Peninsula. That means it's got Malaysia to the north and it has Indonesia to the south if you just cross a little bit of the Pacific Ocean. Singapore itself is an island, technically 64 incorporated islands, but realistically Singapore is a city-state. You're going to find the entire city, more or less, that you would visit on one major island. Singapore, being located at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, was an incredibly important trade area, so a lot of people wanted to control this throughout history. From the ancient times to about the 14th century, Singapore was merely a small fishing village. Long ago in the local dialect, this city was called Tamasek, but then changed the name of the city to a Sanskrit word, Singapura, which means City of Lions. You see this connection to the City of Lions today in modern Singapore as the national seal, and one of the main things that you see in Singapore, the Merlion, are a homage to the naming of the city in the 14th century. After the 14th century, the island that became modern-day Singapore fell under a lot of different Muslim sultanates, either controlled by Muslim sultanates from the Malaysian peninsula above them, or from Muslim sultanates below them, specifically the Javanese. In the early 1500s, the Europeans started to dabble in a bit of colonialism in the region that Singapore finds itself in, with the Portuguese setting up their first colony, Malacca, on the Malaysian peninsula. That meant that the local sultanate control of these islands would change very quickly, with the Dutch coming in, with the British coming in, with the Portuguese expanding their control, and everyone else trying to get their hands on this region. Lots of money to be made. The story of modern Singapore really starts in 1819. The British government, on behalf of the British East India Trading Company, made an agreement with local Malaysian rulers to set up a port located in Singapore to start a good flow of trades from the East Indies back to India, back to the British Empire. The man who became a very important figure and one of the first governors of Singapore was a man named Sir Stamford Raffles. And under his leadership, Singapore would become a small fishing village and then turn into a large financial hub for the British East India Company. Taking a look at history, if you did anything with the British in the past during the colonial times, you know if you gave a little bit, they were going to take a lot. So just 5 years later, after the first agreement with the local Malay rulers, the British seized Penang, they seized Malacca, Singapore, and this became a major trading hub for the British Empire. And then they just took all of Malaysia, calling it British Malaya, in which they were in control of until World War II. During its time as a British colony and also being a hub for trade, the British had to import a lot of different people to work the various jobs that they needed to happen, both in the Malaya colony as well as Singapore itself. This created the very specific diversity that Singapore and modern-day Malaysia has, where you find a very big mix of Chinese immigrants, Malaysian and Indonesian local peoples that were imported from the various islands, Indians who came from the British Raj to work specifically in the rubber fields in Malaysia. A lot of these immigrants came specifically from South India, so Tamil is the main Indian ethnic group that you'll find in Singapore today, as well as Arab traders who were responsible originally for a lot of the trade between the East Indies, India, and the European world, as well as the Middle East, of course. That means that Singapore was a big melting pot that was set up for either big success or big failures based on these backgrounds of people that were all living there. During World War II, the Japanese actually occupied Singapore from 1942 to 1945. This was like one of the major factors of Singapore's push for independence, because obviously during this time the British mandate was gone, the British came back after World War II, but the Singaporeans were already set up to like do their own thing. In 1959, the Singaporeans elected their most well-known politician, Lee Kuan Yew, who set up Singapore to be a financial hub, a place that was very different than the rest of Southeast Asia, and a place that was looking for modernity, success, and more particularly rule of law and a strong idea of what a nation would be. In 1963, they actually had a merger idea with Malaysia, but that never took off, and in 1965, they became fully independent, had their own flag, had their own government, and moved forward as one of the new countries of the world. Modern Singapore is actually a really cool economic story. In 1965, when they became their own country, they really didn't have a lot. Not a lot of natural resources, very small country, they needed to work a lot of stuff out fast. The Prime Minister focused on industrialization, public housing, really good services, national identity and unity, and then also used a strict policy of really strict laws, really strict penalties to make sure that the society would move forward as quickly as possible. And they were actually able to achieve an incredible rise in GDP per capita, an incredible rise in standard of living for anywhere else in Asia at the time. Modern Singapore today is a financial hub. They're doing absolutely amazing. It's one of the most advanced countries in the world, one of the cleanest countries in the world, has some of the most friendly people that you'll find anywhere, and it's a super unique and interesting place. And if you like comparative politics and you like traveling and comparing places, Singapore is just a very unique place. Think of it sort of as like the Dubai of Southeast Asia, but it was the Dubai before Dubai was Dubai, and Singapore didn't have any of the resources that Dubai had to build any of that. It was all done through really good planning and really good ideas and follow through. So when you go to Singapore, be impressed. That being said, this is a travel guide, so let's talk about traveling in Singapore with a practical information section. Money. In Singapore, they use the Singapore dollar, and the Singapore dollar trades at about $1 to 1.33 Singapore dollars, more or less. Singapore, being an international financial hub with a lot of investment from abroad, is very, very expensive. You can burn through a lot of cash on a trip to Singapore, but it's also not terribly expensive if you know what you're doing. It could be as expensive as New York. It also could be as expensive as a trip to Bangkok. It really depends on how you plan and what you like to do with your time. Singapore has super luxury. Singapore also has common stuff for the common guy, so it depends on the way that you want to travel. Starting off with the price of things, if you want to book a hotel in Singapore, hotels are not cheap. If you want like something quite nice, you could easily pay up to $250 to $300. Of course, if you wanted something super luxury, you can pay $2,000, $3,000. I don't know your budget. I'm not like a luxury travel influencer, so I don't know. Probably people who have that much money aren't watching this, but I was able to book a room for 5 nights and I paid about $100 a night staying in Little India. It doesn't get you a lot, but it's okay. But in comparison to a lot of other places in the world, it's quite expensive for what you get. You can also stay in a hostel if you're interested, but again, around $35 to $50 for a hostel room bed. It's probably the most expensive place in Southeast Asia that you would find a hostel bed, probably very similar to Japan or South Korea for reference. The good news is that food in Singapore is actually very cheap and very cheap in comparison to the salary of people. So a lot of people in Singapore think Singapore is very expensive, but the ministry came out and they said, actually, it's one of the cheapest places to spend your money on food. The reason for this is that they have a lot of street food that has been sort of regulated into things called hawker centers. A hawker center is basically like a massive street food market. People have their own little vendor stalls, they sell a couple different dishes, and all of the dishes that you can find there are about, maybe between 5 and, let's call it 4 and 8 Singapore dollars for a dish or something, which turns out to be, around $5 or even less depending on what it is, and that's like gonna get you a meal. You're not gonna be able to, you really can't find stuff like that in other cities that are really expensive with the same quality. So Singapore, the food actually can be quite cheap. But on the other hand, the alcohol in Singapore is wildly expensive. The sticker price is shocking. It's probably the same as if you live in San Francisco or if you live in New York, but it even could be more expensive than that in some cases. They apparently have a very high liquor tax and tax on cigarettes because the government has a lot of regulation. So I was in this place that served like pizza and beer, and they legit had a beer on the menu for 1 pint, and it was 27 Singapore dollars, which is somewhere like 21 USD for a beer. So if you want cheap beer, Singapore is definitely not the option for you. I'm sure if you go to the store and you buy like, a bottle of beer, it's not too bad. That being said, in the corner shops, like for water, it was $4.40 Singaporean for like a bottle of water. So it's a really oddly expensive and inexpensive country. It really depends on the thing. So if you want food like the locals eat, it's not expensive. but if you want to buy like a beer and water as a tourist, it like could be easily more than like 5 meals. So I don't really understand it, but it all works out in some sense. Also, we can shift this over to transportation because Singapore actually has really good transportation. Obviously, it's a city-state and it's really highly mechanized, so they have a really nice connected subway and underground system. They have buses, and then they have taxi apps like Grab Taxi. It's basically like Uber for Singapore. Taxis around the city, you're never really going to spend more than $30 to go anywhere because Singapore realistically isn't very big. 30 Singapore dollars is about, like 25 USD. That's the price that you normally pay to get from the airport to the city center if you're doing that. If you want to ride the subway, which is really good, really efficient, really clean, runs on time, it's like just like perfect in basically every way. I think it's about like $2.50 Singaporean to ride the subway. I would definitely recommend it. It also has really good air conditioning, and Singapore is just brutally hot, so I would definitely go for that. They also have integrated buses in case you're going to some place that is not super well connected, but if you're in the tourist zone, you're in the tourist zone. It's not a big island, so you're going to be able to get to where you need to go with either Grab or the subway. So either one is good. To go with the transportation, Singapore has a main airport, of course, the Singapore Changi International Airport, but the airport itself is sort of like a tourist attraction. They have beautiful facilities. It's super fancy. It has the best lounge that I've ever personally been in with really fantastic food. They've got shows. They've got this water feature that you can go check out. As far as airports are considered in the world, it's got to be one of the top 5, and it's not bad if you have like an extra couple hours, maybe you have a layover, because a lot of flights from Indonesia to the rest of Southeast Asia stop in Singapore. Like just hang out in the airport. Like, it's nice. It's definitely a nice place, and it is expensive, but it's not terribly expensive. Certainly not more expensive than the rest of the city. So I was very impressed. Safety and security. Singapore is maybe the safest country in the world. There's all these videos online of being able to like leave your iPhone or your laptop in a cafe, and you come back in an hour and it's still sitting there. It's probably one of the only places in the world with that. And the reason for that, it's actually very interesting, is that they have very harsh punitive measures for committing crimes, and people are very afraid of stepping out of line, which makes sense because obviously you don't want harsh penalties for something so stupid. Singapore has also been known to have some of the highest fines for things in the world. So for example, like if you are drinking a smoothie on the metro, the fine is 500 Singapore dollars. Like, they're not messing around. So when you're in Singapore, like, it's not like the rest of Southeast Asia where it sort of feels lawless. Singapore has very strict laws that say you can't chew gum, laws that laws that can get you into a lot of trouble if you're not careful. So when you go to Singapore, like, don't bring drugs, don't do drugs, like follow the laws, don't jaywalk, like they're very happy to like charge you huge fines, they'll put you in jail. But that being said, like that creates a society that is very safe and very clean and everyone's respectful and whatever. So you can say what you want about crime and punishment. I find it very interesting because in most other countries it's not like that. But I have to say Singapore is run very efficiently, and as a tourist it's like, wow, this is a very clean and very clean, well-run city, for sure. Okay, so now we're talking about getting around in Singapore. What I really wanted to talk about is that Singapore's national language is English. One of the main things that Lee Kuan Yew, the first leader of Singapore, wanted to make sure that everybody stays on the same page with so many very different ethnic groups was to have English be the national language. Everyone needs to learn English. Everyone needs to just have the top level governmental idea of a country, and then you can do your own thing underneath that. So in Singapore, like when you take the metro, you're going to hear 4 different languages. You're going to hear English, you're going to hear Malay, you're going to hear Tamil, and you're going to hear Chinese. A lot of the Chinese also speak Hokkien. Hokkien is a specific type of Chinese coming from Fujian province. It's also very similar to the Chinese diaspora language that you find in the Malaysian and Indonesian parts of the world. That being said, Singapore definitely has an overt Chinese feeling to it. They're definitely the largest demographic, so the majority of the people that you see walking around are going to be ethnic Chinese. Many of them, of course, speak English, and they've sort of morphed the English into something very interesting, which I like as a sort of person who loves languages, which is called Singlish, which is basically taking like the Chinese intonation and some Chinese words from their local dialect, inputting it into English, and it makes one of the most puzzling accents of English that I've personally ever heard. And it's something that is very unique, and you'll hear the Singlish, of course, they learn in the schools now. It's like they learn standard British English, but everyone speaks Singlish. So getting around Singapore is super easy because everything is in English. So when you go to the museums, when you go to any sort of thing, all the translations are done in English, and so if you speak English, you're going to be fine on a trip to Singapore. That is, like, for example, very different than Malaysia, where Malay is definitely the first language. A lot of stuff is in English because they were a British colony, but a lot of that is secondary to Malay, which is definitely the first language. All right, so now let's talk about my favorite section, which is food. Food in Singapore is awesome, really good, delicious, diverse. It's the best. I have to say Malaysia and Singapore are probably my two favorite countries as far as food is concerned, because you get super authentic flavors from the various communities that live there, and you never get sick of eating, because it's like you can have really authentic Chinese food for breakfast, you can have really authentic Malay food for lunch, you can have really authentic South Indian food for dinner, and then you can have British food, international food, whatever you want on top of that. It's like amazing. It's like a food mecca, like a paradise, at least for me. So the things to try when you're there, like, just start with each one. The Chinese food that's very specific, maybe the most famous one is called chicken rice, or Hainanese chicken rice. Hainan is a region of China, and you can find it in the majority of Chinese diaspora communities in Southeast Asia. In Singapore, they really have a nice style. It's a nice greasy rice. They cook the rice with the chicken fat. They do a fragrant chicken with lemongrass. It's either boiled or roasted, or you can do both. They normally serve it with a spicy sauce. They have also like a soy type based sauce, and it's really good. Every hawker center you're gonna go to, you're gonna find it. There's tons of different Chinese foods that you can try. Some that are very Singaporean, some that are more Chinese influenced, some that are a mix of both. Definitely go for the Chinese food. Next, we can move over to the Malaysian dishes. Malaysian food is really good. It's fantastic. They've got so many interesting flavors. I always like to call it like a mixture of like Asian food and Indian food, where they both meet. A lot of curries, a lot of deep, rich flavors, but more with an East Asian or South Asian profile rather than an Indian profile. Awesome. If you have the option to go to a nasi kandar, definitely do that. Nasi kandars are like a rice house, and so a lot of these places are a little crossover because Malaysian food is influenced specifically between Muslim Indian food, Arab food, and Malay food, and really good breads that are Indian influenced, like rotis and naans and all that good stuff. You get the different rice dishes like biryanis. You get the different sort of fried rice dishes from the Malaysian and Indonesian areas, like nasi goreng and mee goreng and all that good stuff. And then they just have these curry plates. So you can just toss on a bunch of different curries. You can have it over some rice. You can have it over some bread. It's like, it's just top. Like, it's just top, top, top. If you're a foodie, top. Another thing you have to try in Singapore is definitely laksa. Laksa is a kind of like red curry coconut noodle soup. It's a sort of fishy backbone. You can also find it in Malaysia, but in Singapore, it's really like a thing to try. There's a couple really famous places. They always have long lines, so prepare if you want to try some laksa for sure. Last up, definitely try some South Indian food. Tamil food is really good. It's very unique. It's very meat heavy. One of my favorite things is to get something called murtabak. Murtabak is like a big fried pancake stuffed with eggs and meat, served with a spicy sauce. It's so good. They have all these hawker centers where you can try all this stuff. So if you're really interested in doing the foodie experience, just spend all your time going to hawker centers. If you want to eat at fancy restaurants, you can do that. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not the way that I like to live my life, and it's certainly not that authentic, but if you're really impressed by the fancy stuff, whatever, go do that. The last thing that you can try is called a Singapore slang. It was invented in the Raffles Hotel, which is the hotel named after Sir Stamford Raffles, the guy who sort of founded Singapore. It's like a cocktail that's worth trying. So if you want to go out for a cocktail, get a Singapore slang, but then go back for the local stuff. Go to Little India, go to Chinatown, go to a hawker center, plant yourself, spend 20 Singapore dollars, and just like feast. You know what I mean? So now let's move on to things to do in Singapore. I think Singapore is like two different cities for two different types of travelers. There's the travelers that are going to spend a lot of money. They're going to go to the Marina Sands Bay. They're going to go to the gardens by the bay. They're going to spend a lot of money to stay at the Raffles Hotel. They're going to go to the fancy restaurants, and that's a type of Singapore that definitely exists. You can go to Clarke Quay. You can spend a lot of money there. If you want to drop cash in Singapore, you can drop cash. If you want 5 stars in Singapore, you can definitely do that. If you want to go to Sentosa Island, which is a sort of fancy resort island, and stay by the coast and see the beautiful water of the Pacific and all that stuff, you can do that. I'm not that kind of traveler, so I'm not going to recommend that to you. Although if you want to do those things, they're definitely good to see, just not how I like to travel. So what I like to do, I like to eat first. I like to see things and learn, and I like to have outdoors experiences. So these are the different places that you can go to achieve those. So first up, you have the three cultural hubs. You've got Chinatown, you've got Little India, you've got Kampong Glam. Kampong Glam is like the Arab, they call it Arab Street, but it's sort of more Malay themed, definitely more Islamic themed. It has the major mosque of Singapore. They have a little street called Haji Lane with like really cool little knickknacks that you can buy. Walking around this area is definitely worth it. It's quite touristy, but they have a couple secondary mosques which are very cool to check out. And then if you go behind it just a little bit, you'll find really nice local Malay food and Arab themed food. They have one major street that's very touristy and very expensive. The rest is like pretty local, so if you just pop in, you know, it's nice stuff. Moving on to Chinatown, Chinatown has lots of good stuff. Chinatown, in some sense, is the oldest area of Singapore in some sense. It's where a lot of the original Chinese immigrants moved. They put up the traditional Chinese houses, the ones that are still kept today. It's very beautiful. They've got some really awesome temples where you can check out the sort of Chinese-influenced Buddhist culture. The second part is eating. Gotta eat in Chinatown. They've got really good hawker centers. Arguably the most famous is the Maxwell Food Center. Gordon Ramsay, Anthony Bourdain have been there. It's really good. They have like lots of good stuff. It's sort of like outdoor. They also have the Chinatown Complex Food Center. This one is like really old school. Like it reminded me a lot of Hong Kong, and it has some like just old stuff going on in there. Really great place to eat. They also have like the most touristy one, which is called Lau Pa Sat. It was featured in like Crazy Rich Asians, if you ever saw that movie. It was okay. It's very touristy. It's like the oldest food hawker center that they have. It used to be an old market, and it's actually funny because Singapore has changed so much in the last 60 years. So it used to be like on the harbor, and then the Singapore just built out more harbor. They built the skyscrapers. So there's just this one really old traditional food center that used to be adjacent to Chinatown. It's still there. Still cool to visit, but very touristy. It's like, if you want to eat, go to the other ones. It's much better. One of the coolest things I did, and is a smart idea for people who don't want to spend too much money but do cool stuff, is to go to the Pinnacle at Duxton. It's actually adjacent to Chinatown, and you can go to the very top floor for, I think, about like $5 Singapore per person. So not too expensive, and it is just fantastic. You get a huge view of the bay. You get a view of Chinatown. You can see all of Singapore, and it's cheap. And if you want to pay for that same view at like a rooftop bar and get a drink, it's going to be like 20 Singapore dollars, maybe 40 Singapore dollars, depending on what you're going to do. So if you just want to get a really nice viewpoint and you want to see it all, definitely the Pinnacle at the Duxton would recommend. The last place that you should definitely go to is Little India. Little India is really cool if you like Indian culture. It's the only part of Singapore that doesn't follow any of the rules that the rest of Singapore seems to follow. There's jaywalking, there's still pretty chaos, there's people on the street, there's a lot of like noise and all this stuff. Like it's somehow the Indians retained that through all the policy and regulations, and I think the government of Singapore just said, we'll just let that be that. So amazing place to eat Southern Indian food, to eat veg Indian food. They have also their own Hindu temples, which are so foreign and so unique. And you can watch the prayer time stuff. That's also very cool. Singapore's just got like so much culture. It's got like so much to see. You can also, to be fair, like you can do a lot of this in Malaysia as well. I just think Singapore, you can find it all in one place within like 10 miles or 15 kilometers. You can just like, you get all of it. So it's like if you want all the different food, all the different languages, all different cultures, all the different vibes, and you only want to go like 10 stops, you can do it all. Really cool. The last thing I did was I decided to get out of the city a little bit because I had 5 days there and it was a lot. And I went to a place called Pulau Ubin, which is basically just a ferry ride away. It took about 15 minutes to get there by ferry. You go all the way to the end of Singapore by the airport, and you hop on a ferry. And there's just like a nice place. You can rent bicycles. You can see sort of like an old kampong or like an old, like a village. And just get into nature because Singapore is on the equator. It's tropical. They got lots of good stuff there. And it was just like a very nice day outside of Singapore. So the cool part is like you can do all of this. You can also, they have a very good zoo you can visit. I don't know. Fancy, not fancy, modern food, not modern food, like alcohol, no alcohol. Like I feel like it's kind of got everything. It was very different than when I was backpacking. I remember when I was backpacking Southeast Asia, I thought Singapore kind of sucked, honestly. And I think now that I'm not backpacking and I'm more like a normal person, I think Singapore is just like a really good place. It is, of course, it's a little bit expensive and certainly more expensive than visiting basically any other country around it, but it is easy and I always called it Asia Light when I was first traveling there. It's like, if you want to go to Asia, but you just don't really want to go to Asia either, Singapore is like a good choice. So that being said, that is my advice on Singapore. I had a really good trip there. It was nice visiting. I would definitely go back. It's really good for about like 3 days to 5 days, depending on how long you'd want to spend. And then it's a good stopover point if you want to do a lot of travel in Southeast Asia and you just need a place to just like be, you know, comfortable and easy and a little bit reminiscent of somewhere that's more close to home. I think it's a nice place too. So if you have any questions about Singapore, definitely feel free to comment below. I'll answer the comments. If you want to book a one-on-one consultation, I'm here for it. And yeah, if anything, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Ciao, ciao.